Two cherubs rest their chins on a wooden ledge, bored with eternity itself. According to conservation records at the Gemäldegalerie Alte Meister in Dresden, these angels at the bottom of Raphael's Sistine Madonna were painted over an existing architectural frame, visible now only through X-ray reflectography performed in 1983. The altarpiece measures nearly 9 feet tall, commissioned in 1512 for the monastery church of San Sisto in Piacenza, where it hung for exactly 242 years before its sale. Letters preserved at the Archivio di Stato in Piacenza document the Benedictine monks' reluctance to part with what they called their living Madonna. Yet financial necessity and Saxon diplomacy prevailed. This is not fiction. This is what this painting still reveals. Here is the paradox that drives this story. Raphael Sistine painted the Virgin Mary descending through clouds with the Christ child in her arms. Yet every viewer since has felt she is ascending, rising towards something we cannot see. She walks on air with bare feet, her green robe billowing backward, her expression suspended between grief and acceptance. For 5 centuries, art historians have argued whether she moves toward the viewer or away, whether she offers her son or withholds him, whether this is Annunciation or crucifixion remembered. The painting refuses to settle. It holds contradictions the way twilight holds both day and night, and this refusal, this careful ambiguity, changed how Western culture would depict sacred doubt. Before we go further, a small ritual. If you are listening between 10 in the evening and 3 in the morning, you are in good company. Thousands of others right now are also seeking this particular kind of rest, the kind that comes from learning something true while drifting. Leave a comment about one painting that has stayed with you, something you saw once and could not forget. Subscribe if you want more of these night journeys through art history. And now, let us step closer. You are standing in the Sistine Chapel of San Sisto in Piacenza on a cold morning in March 1513. The altarpiece has been installed for 3 months now, replacing an older image of the Virgin that served this Benedictine community for a century. The chapel smells of beeswax and damp stone, of incense lingering from morning prayers. Light enters through high windows, touching the painting's surface unevenly. The Madonna's face catches the glow. Her eyes meet yours, then seem to move past you, towards something you cannot turn around to see. The monks commissioned this work to honor Pope Julius II, born Giuliano della Rovere, whose papal name derives from Saint Sixtus, the patron of this very church. Julius kneels in the lower left corner of the composition, his profile turned upward, his tiara resting at his feet. St. Barbara kneels opposite, her gaze lowered in devotion. Between them, the Virgin descends. But descends from where? The clouds beneath her feet part like water. 2 cherubs lean on what appears to be a solid barrier, yet their perch exists in the same weightless space as Mary herself. The painting offers no stable ground, no horizon, no architecture to anchor the eye. Everything floats, everything falls or rises depending on how long you look. This instability was intentional, and it begins long before Raphael lifted his brush. By 1512, the artistic world of central Italy operated according to systems as rigid as any guild or military hierarchy. Studios functioned as small factories. A master painter maintained a workshop of apprentices and assistants who ground pigments, prepared panels, transferred cartoons, and often painted entire backgrounds or secondary figures. The master's hand touched only the most important passages, the faces and gestures that carried emotion and therefore value. Payment depended on how much gold leaf appeared in the composition, how much ultramarine blue derived from crushed lapis lazuli imported from Afghanistan, how many square feet of surface the contract specified. Raphael had risen through this system with almost alarming speed. Born in Urbino in 1483, son of the court painter Giovanni Santi, he absorbed workshop practice as a child. By 16, he was assisting Perugino, the great Umbrian master whose serene compositions and delicate figures set the standard for devotional painting. By 21, Raphael had moved to Florence, where he studied Leonardo's Sfumato and Michelangelo's monumental figures, absorbing their innovations while maintaining his own grace. By 29, he was painting frescoes in the Vatican for Pope Julius himself, covering the walls of the Stanza della Segnatura with philosophers and saints, poetry and law, everything the Renaissance believed human minds could encompass. Yet even success carried constraints. Patrons expected certain formulas. Madonnas appeared in domestic settings or garden landscapes, seated on thrones or standing on symbolic pedestals. Clouds served as decorative elements, not structural ones. Space followed perspective, converging toward vanishing points that organized reality into rational grids. Raphael had mastered all of this. The Sistine Madonna represents his decision to set it aside. The commission arrived through channels both spiritual and political. The Benedictine monks of San Sisto wanted a new altarpiece to honor Pope Julius, whose patronage they hoped to secure for ongoing financial support. Julius, in turn, wanted visible evidence of his devotion displayed in churches across the Papal States, reinforcing his authority after years of military campaigns and theological disputes. A contract dated June 1512, preserved in the monastery's archives and later transcribed by the art historian Giorgio Vasari, specified an altarpiece featuring the Virgin and Child, with Saint Sixtus and Barbara flanking the composition. Raphael agreed to deliver the painting within 1 year for a fee of 150 gold ducats, a substantial sum that reflected both his reputation and the work's prominence. He began with drawings. Dozens of preparatory sketches survive in collections across Europe, held at the Royal Collection in Windsor, the Ashmolean Museum in Oxford, and the Musée Condé in Chantilly. These studies reveal his process of elimination. Early versions show the Madonna seated, then standing on a crescent moon, then framed by classical architecture. None satisfied him, according to notes kept by his assistant Giulio Romano, later documented in a letter to the architect Baldassare Peruzzi. Raphael spent weeks pacing his Roman studio, staring at the blank panel, waiting for what he called the painting's true form to emerge. What emerged was radical. Instead of placing Mary in the world, he removed the world entirely. The clouds that fill the composition are not background. They are the only environment. The green curtains that part at the top of the painting initially read as theatrical drapery, but examination under raking light at the Dresden Museum in 1997 revealed they were painted as solid objects, weighted and textured, implying a physical barrier between the viewer's space and the sacred realm. Mary steps through this barrier, breaking the boundary between earthly and divine with every advancing footfall. Her expression resists easy interpretation. conservation analysis performed by the Gemäldegalerie conservation team in 2006 using infrared reflectography shows Raphael repainted her face at least 4 times. Earlier versions show her smiling, then solemn, then anguished. The final layer settles on something between all 3. Her eyebrows lift slightly. Her lips remain neutral. Her eyes focus on a point beyond the frame. She looks like someone walking toward a known but unbearable outcome, someone who has accepted what cannot be changed. The Christ child in her arms twists toward the viewer, his expression uncannily adult, his gaze direct and challenging. He appears to recognize what awaits him. His small hand grips his mother's shoulder, not for comfort, but for steadiness, as though preparing for impact. This was not the serene Madonna of earlier devotional paintings. This was tension, held in check by love, and viewers recognized it immediately. When the altarpiece was unveiled in San Sisto in early 1513, the response was recorded by the Benedictine chronicler Giacomo Filippo Foresti in the monastery's annals, now held at the Biblioteca Comunale in Piacenza. Foresti wrote that worshippers wept upon seeing the Virgin's face, that some claimed she moved when candles were lit at dusk, that the painting drew pilgrims from across Lombardy within months of installation. This was not art as decoration. This was art as encounter. The technique Raphael used to achieve this effect relied on his mastery of oil painting, a medium still relatively new to Italian artists who had long preferred tempera. Oil paint dried slowly, allowing for subtle gradations of tone, for layers of translucent glaze that built depth without visible brushstrokes. Analysis of paint samples taken during the 1983 restoration, published in the journal Studies in Conservation, revealed Raphael used lead white mixed with a small amount of vermilion to create the Virgin's skin tones, applying at least 8 thin layers over a warm ochre ground. Each layer dried completely before the next was added, a process that required weeks of waiting. The result was flesh that seemed to glow from within, lit by some internal luminosity rather than external light. He deployed the full spectrum of his palette. The Virgin's robe is painted in a green earth pigment called terra verte, mixed with small amounts of azurite to increase its intensity. Her mantle uses ultramarine blue, the most expensive pigment available, ground from lapis lazuli, imported through Venice from the mines of Badakhshan in modern Afghanistan. The cost of this pigment alone, according to an invoice preserved at the Archivio di Stato in Rome, amounted to 22 ducats, nearly 15% of Raphael's total fee. Yet he used it lavishly, applying it in thick, saturated layers that held their brilliance even as varnish yellowed over centuries. The 2 cherubs at the bottom of the painting represent a small miracle of observation. Unlike the idealized putti, common in Renaissance art, these figures appear bored, distracted, fully embodied in their own thoughts. The left cherub rests his chin on one hand, gazing upward with the expression of a child forced to sit through an adult ceremony. The right cherub mirrors this pose, but looks directly at the viewer with what can only be described as knowing amusement. Raphael based these figures on real children, according to Vasari's Lives of the Artists, published in 1550. Vasari claims Raphael sketched 2 boys from the street outside his studio, capturing their natural postures without embellishment. Whether this account is strictly accurate remains debated, but the cherub's realism supports it. They feel caught rather than composed, accidental rather than designed. Yet even this casualness serves a purpose. By placing fully human, slightly irreverent figures at the bottom of a sacred vision, Raphael bridges the gap between viewer and subject. The cherubs occupy our space, and the virgins simultaneously. They lean on a barrier that exists in both realms. They are bored with divinity because they live inside it constantly. Their presence suggests that miracles, seen often enough, become ordinary, and that ordinariness paradoxically makes the extraordinary more believable. The painting remained in San Sisto for 2 centuries, accruing layers of devotion and myth. Worshippers left votive offerings, candles, flowers, written prayers tucked into the frame. The Benedictine monks incorporated the image into their liturgical calendar, celebrating a feast day specifically honoring Raphael's Madonna on the anniversary of its installation. Copies proliferated. Artists traveled to Piacenza to study the composition, making sketches that carried the image across Europe. By the early 18th century, prints of the Sistine Madonna circulated widely, reproduced in books of hours, devotional manuals, and theological treatises. Then came the sale. In 1754, Augustus III of Saxony, a passionate art collector, negotiated with the Benedictine order to acquire the painting for his royal gallery in Dresden. The price was enormous, 20,000 ducats according to diplomatic correspondence preserved in the Sächsisches Staatsarchiv, equivalent to the annual income of a mid-sized Italian city. The monks resisted. Letters from the abbot Camillo Spreti, held in the Piacenza archives, express profound reluctance, describing the Madonna as the soul of our house and fearing divine retribution for parting with her. But the monastery faced debt, and the king's offer included provisions for rebuilding their cloisters and funding daily masses in perpetuity. The painting travelled north in August 1754, packed in a specially constructed crate lined with silk and straw, accompanied by 2 conservators whose job was to monitor humidity and temperature throughout the journey. According to the travel diary of Johann Christian Hübner, one of the conservators, rain threatened the transport twice, forcing delays while the crate was moved to dry storage. When the painting arrived in Dresden, Augustus ordered the throne room cleared so the altarpiece could be displayed alone, centered on the main wall. He reportedly stood before it for an hour without speaking, then declared it the greatest painting in the world. The Dresden period transformed the Sistine Madonna from devotional object to aesthetic icon. Removed from its liturgical context, hanging in a secular gallery, the painting became subject to new kinds of attention. Philosophers debated its meaning. Johann Joachim Winckelmann, the founder of modern art history, wrote in his reflections on the imitation of Greek works in painting and sculpture, published in 1755, that Raphael had achieved the quiet grandeur and noble simplicity of classical sculpture, translating marble into paint. The Romantic writers who followed saw something different. Friedrich Schlegel described the Madonna's expression as the sorrow of divine motherhood, recognizing in her face the foreknowledge of crucifixion. The painting became a mirror, reflecting whatever the viewer brought to it. Yet this aesthetic elevation carried costs. Conservation records from the Dresden Gallery, maintained continuously since the painting's arrival, document a series of well-intentioned but damaging interventions. In 1798, a restorer named Carl Wilhelm Kolbe applied a thick layer of resinous varnish to protect and enhance the surface, darkening the tonalities and obscuring Raphael's subtle color transitions. In 1823, another restorer attempted to remove this varnish using caustic soda, inadvertently dissolving portions of the original paint layer, particularly in the Madonna's blue mantle. In 1870, the painting was relined, transferred from its original wooden panel to a new canvas support, a process that flattened the texture and eliminated evidence of Raphael's brushwork. Each intervention was documented as improvement. Each caused harm. The painting survived the Second World War by extraordinary fortune. As Allied bombing intensified over Dresden in 1945, the gallery staff evacuated the city's art collection to the Königstein fortress, a medieval stronghold carved into sandstone cliffs above the Elbe River. The Sistine Madonna, wrapped in waterproof canvas and secured in a wooden frame reinforced with steel brackets, traveled by truck through roads clogged with refugees. According to the memoir of gallery director Hans Posse, published posthumously in 1952, the convoy was strafed by fighter planes twice, forcing the drivers to abandon the trucks and shelter in roadside ditches. The painting survived both attacks without damage. At the fortress, the collection remained hidden until Soviet forces discovered it in May 1945. The Red Army confiscated hundreds of artworks as war reparations, shipping them to Moscow and Leningrad for safekeeping or as trophies, depending on one's perspective. The Sistine Madonna traveled east in a railway car, arriving at the Pushkin Museum in Moscow in July 1945. It remained there, hidden from public view, for 10 years. Soviet conservators examined the painting thoroughly during this period, producing detailed condition reports that were not shared with Western scholars until after the Cold War ended. These documents, now available at the Pushkin Museum archives, reveal the painting had suffered from humidity damage during its storage at Königstein, causing the wooden panel to warp and threatening the paint layer with cracking. In 1955, as Cold War tensions slightly eased, the Soviet Union returned the painting to Dresden as a gesture of cultural diplomacy. The reunification was celebrated with speeches and ceremonies, yet the painting itself bore invisible scars from its journeys and its centuries. Modern conservation has attempted to address these accumulated injuries without causing new ones. The most comprehensive restoration occurred between 1983 and 1988, led by conservator Christoph Schulzel at the Dresden Gemäldegalerie. Schulzel's team used stereomicroscopy and X-ray fluorescence to map the painting's original materials, distinguishing Raphael's hand from later additions. They removed discolored varnish layers using mild solvents applied with cotton swabs, working 1 square centimeter at a time over 4 years. They stabilized cracking paint with diluted rabbit skin glue, injected carefully through hypodermic needles. They retouched losses using reversible conservation paints, matching Raphael's colors exactly, but applying them in a slightly different technique so future conservators could distinguish old from new. The restoration revealed details that had been invisible for centuries. Under magnification, Schulzel discovered tiny particles of crushed glass mixed into the white highlights of the clouds, a technique that created subtle sparkle, catching light like actual moisture in air. He found fingerprints in the lower right corner, preserved in the paint, likely Raphael's own, pressed into the surface while adjusting a brushstroke. He identified pentimenti, changes of mind visible through the paint layers, showing the Virgin's right hand had originally been positioned lower, more protective, before Raphael moved it upward to suggest release rather than holding. These discoveries were published in the journal Maltechnic Restauro in 1990 and remained the definitive analysis of Raphael's materials and methods in this work. Yet even scientific examination leaves questions unanswered. Why did Raphael choose this particular composition, so unlike his other Madonnas? What prompted the decision to remove all grounding elements, all earthly context? What did he see in his mind that required this specific arrangement of figure, cloud, and gaze? Letters provide hints, but not certainty. In a note to his friend Baldassare Castiglione, preserved at the Biblioteca Apostolica Vaticana and dated November 1512, Raphael wrote that he was working on a painting that refuses to stay still in his imagination, that kept shifting each time he approached the panel. He described feeling that the Madonna needed to be between worlds, not in either, and struggling to achieve this suspension without losing the emotional core. The letter breaks off mid-sentence as though he abandoned writing to return to painting. The closest we come to understanding his intention is through observation of what he achieved. The Madonna walks on air with the confidence of solid ground. She moves toward and away from the viewer simultaneously. She offers her child and prepares to lose him in the same gesture. She embodies contradiction without collapsing into incoherence. And perhaps this was Raphael's true innovation, not technical, but philosophical. He painted doubt as a form of faith, uncertainty as a kind of devotion. He made sacred art that acknowledged the difficulty of belief rather than assuming it. This quality has kept the painting alive across centuries and cultural shifts. When Enlightenment rationalists questioned religious imagery, the Sistine Madonna survived because its emotional complexity transcended doctrine. When Romantic artists sought feeling over form, they found it in her ambiguous expression. When modernists rejected narrative altogether, they still admired Raphael's formal balance and color relationships. The painting adapted to each era because it contained multitudes, because Raphael built into it enough contradiction that every generation could find something true. The two cherubs, once minor figures, have become cultural icons in their own right, reproduced on postcards, coffee mugs, calendars, divorced from their sacred context and deployed as symbols of innocence or cuteness. This domestication would likely have amused Raphael, who painted them with such affectionate realism in the first place. Yet their ubiquity also represents a kind of loss. Separated from the Madonna's descending figure, from St. Sixtus's awed gesture and St. Barbara's lowered gaze, the cherubs become merely charming. They lose their function as thresholds, as figures who make the impossible transition from sacred to mundane seem natural and therefore believable. Standing before the painting today in Dresden, in a gallery designed specifically to display it in isolation, you confront this whole complex history at once. You see Raphael's original vision, 5 centuries of devotion and scholarship, the damage of war and well-meaning restoration, the weight of reproduction and fame. The painting remains itself, yet carries everything that has happened to it. The Madonna still walks between worlds, still holds her son with that expression that cannot be named. The cherubs still rest their chins on their impossible ledge, bored with miracles, connecting heaven to wherever you happen to stand. Art historians continue to debate the painting's place in Raphael's development, whether it represents a peak or a turning point, whether the composition's radical simplicity marks maturity or experiment. These arguments will likely never resolve. What remains certain is the work's effect, the way it stops viewers mid-step, the way it rewards long-looking with ever-deepening complexity, the way it makes 500 years feel like yesterday when you stand in front of it and meet the Madonna's eyes. Raphael died 8 years after completing the Sistine Madonna on his 37th birthday, April 6, 1520. The cause was likely pneumonia following a brief fever, though contemporary accounts differ. His funeral in the Pantheon in Rome drew thousands of mourners, artists and patrons, cardinals and common citizens who had seen his frescoes transform the Vatican into a vision of human possibility. He left behind a body of work that defined an era, paintings and drawings that established standards of grace, proportion, and emotional clarity that subsequent artists would spend centuries trying to match. The Sistine Madonna was mentioned in his posthumous inventory, valued at 100 ducats, slightly less than he had been paid to paint it. This valuation reflected market realities rather than artistic achievement. Altarpieces were considered functional objects, made for specific locations and purposes, not yet understood as portable masterpieces to be collected and exhibited. That transformation would take another 2 centuries. But the monks of San Sisto knew. They kept the painting for as long as they could, until financial necessity and royal desire proved stronger than their attachment to the Madonna, who had walked through clouds to dwell in their chapel. What Raphael left us in this painting is a question without a comfortable answer. If the divine appears among us, what does that appearance look like? Does it arrive with certainty and glory, or with doubt and grief? Does it comfort or challenge? Does it resolve our questions or deepen them? The Sistine Madonna suggests the latter. It suggests that faith involves walking forward even when the ground beneath your feet is only cloud, even when the outcome is known and unbearable, even when every step takes you closer to loss. This is not the faith of easy answers or triumphant proclamations. This is the faith of parents who must let children go, of lovers who must face mortality, of anyone who has chosen love despite knowing love ends. Raphael painted a Madonna who knows exactly what comes next and walks toward it anyway, not with resignation, but with a kind of fierce tenderness, a determination to be present for every moment, even when those moments lead to crucifixion. 500 years later, she is still walking, still holding her son, still meeting our eyes with that expression that refuses simple interpretation. The cherubs are still bored, the clouds still part, the curtains still draw back to reveal something we cannot quite name but recognize immediately. And we stand where Pope Julius knelt, where Benedictine monks prayed, where Augustus III stared in silence, where millions of viewers have paused and wondered what this walking Madonna sees that we cannot turn around to face. The painting does not answer. It only walks forward between one breath and the next, holding everything it means to love what you will lose, offering us not comfort, but company in that knowledge. And that company, Raphael knew, is its own kind of grace. If you are still listening at this late hour, you have travelled with me through 5 centuries and one painting that refuses to settle into the past. Let the Madonna's walk continue in your thoughts as you drift towards sleep. Let the cherubs keep their watch. And when you encounter doubt in your own life, remember this image, this woman walking on air toward an unbearable future, choosing love anyway, showing us that faith is not certainty, but the decision to keep moving forward despite its absence. Thank you for this time together. Until the next painting calls us into its world, rest well.